Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Crash MotoGP podcast brought to you by NordVPN. On the show today, a look back at Malaysia on MotoGP's return to Sepang, championship permutations as we hurtle towards the final round of the season where MotoGP and Moto2 champions will be crowned, plus a bitter end to Aleix Espargaro's title hopes and more. The recording date is Tuesday, the 25th of October. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me as ever is Crash's MotoGP editor, Pete McLaren, and former Grand Prix rider and British champion, Keith Huewen. And, well, where to start, really, Keith, wasn't it? Pecco Bagnaia, he's taken another step. He's basically got one hand now on that MotoGP title after winning from 9th on the grid.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely nailed what he had to do, didn't he? You don't want to go to Valencia with a close run thing. We've seen championships lost. You can go back over the years and find people that have lost championships at the final round, and you just don't want to be there. Having made all that momentum over the last few races, 91 points he's grabbed back, and then basically Quartararo now got it all to do. They both rode brilliantly. You've got to say that Bagnaia, I think, and this is no one will know except within Ducati, it looked like Bastianini had the pace to make the pass. But I think just on that last lap, unless he had been in an obvious position, I don't think he was going to make the pass. It looked to me like he proved that he could have made the pass, but then he didn't make the pass. So Bagnaia got top points. I mean, just perfect for Bagnaia. Quartararo, third place on the Yamaha, I thought was just a brilliant ride. And then if you go back further, we didn't see anything of it. The most interesting race was going on way back down the order with Crutchlow. Crutchlow, birthday boy on Saturday this week, oldest man in the field, virtually retired, and he's still battling away well in the points. Had his best ride of the year so far. So hats off to Crutchlow. Brilliant stuff from him. I mean, the place is going to be sad without him when he does finally decide not to ride, of course, but great ride from him. There's actually so much to talk about this week. I mean, the MotoGP race wasn't that interesting, it's got to be said, but the Moto2 race, and particularly the Moto3 race, which I know you're going to in a little while, Harry, was just outstanding. I got to have a lot to say about that.
I think Moto3 and Moto2 may have slightly stolen a little bit of the limelight this weekend, that's for sure. But as you say, brilliant battle. I think that battle with Crutchlow was over 12th in the end. Darren Binder, Aleix Espargaro, Zarco Miller, and they moved up. Oliveira was in it, Vinales. It was absolutely mental, and that's quoting Cal Crutchlow. And in the end, I think he won that battle just about, well, the battle for 12th at least. So but his best result, as you say, Keith. So Cal having a good run of it, which is always good to see. Best result since coming back from retirement, I believe. But back up at front, Pete, it wasn't actually Pecco and Fabio leading the way come qualifying. It was Jorge Martin who was really managing to pull a lead over a second at one point. And then, I hate to say it, but once again, it all kind of came crashing down on him.
It did, didn't it? Yeah, it was another weekend where Jorge Martin, when he gets that pace, when he's done this several times, hasn't he? He just has that speed sometimes to just make people go, wow. I always remember Silverstone, I think it was last year. Remember in qualifying, he cut the track. And he did, it wasn't in doubt, and he knew he'd done it. And so his time came up, and it was 2 seconds quicker than anyone else. But because of who he is and what he'd done at other races, people were actually going, is that right? And he came in after the session and was going, no, guys, no, I cut the track. And the replay showed he'd run over one of the chicanes. But the fact that the other riders, didn't just instantly dismiss it as, oh, look, someone's cut the track. Because it was Martin, they were kind of like, well, you know what? He can do that kind of thing. And he was doing that. He was showing that kind of speed. When he's got the bike working as he wants, the front end feeling is something that, and Keith spoke about how important that is, that he's been struggling with at quite a lot of races. He had that back. He looked confident. He looked strong. He looked like he'd broken the other Ducatis, didn't he? He just got that gap away from them. And he says 1 kilometre an hour quicker. That was all it was. But that turn 5, it's sort of a downhill, fast corner right behind the pits at Sepang. So it's one that all the media are quite familiar with because you can see it very well from the back of the media room. And it's a fast corner. It's where James Tozen had a massive accident in testing some years back when he was riding. But it all went wrong for him there. And unfortunately, of course, he won last year. He hasn't won a race this year. That's obviously playing on his mind. He said, look, I wasn't interested in a podium. It was about a win today, and that's it. So we know what he's thinking, but not a great year for him, is it? He's missed out on the factory Ducati seat. He's missed out on the race win there. It was just another sort of setback. But he's fast at Valencia, so he's got one more chance to pull something out.
You've always got to ask yourself, when you've got a second lead at that quickly, do others know something that I don't? And clearly, he found that one out. The track was tricky this weekend. It was greasy in places. There were damp patches. The humidity is so high that the damp patches don't really dry out. You've got to be so mega accurate with the whole thing. But by the time you get to the MotoGP race, normally it's in track's in the best condition it can probably be in during the day. It will have dried out as much as it can. But when you've got that much pace, you're into the unknown a little bit. And, you saw how many times people were either close to accidents over the weekend or had them. There were a lot of crashes during race day, and a lot of that was down to the condition of the track. It just didn't clean up as much as you might have expected. It caught a lot of good guys out.
Well, speaking of Ducati as well, though, it was a good weekend for them in all, wrapping up the title. But equally, we mentioned it right at the start, the Enea Bastianini and Pecco Bagnaia fight rearing its head once again. Neither of them really caring. We talked about it for ages, so I don't want to keep banging on the team order drum. But also, next year's going to be spicy, right? Because Pecco Bagnaia has already said it's going to be tough with Enea as a teammate next year. It's going to be different to what I've got now with Jack.
I think what they're doing at the minute, they're kind of jockeying for position this year for next year. It's kind of working out that team dynamic during the course of this year. It's worked out quite well for Ducati. They've got two very fast guys that are going to be on the factory bikes next year. No doubt about it, Bastianini deserves to be on that factory bike. But next year, it becomes serious when they're both on the red bikes as opposed to the opposing team bikes. It's going to be a situation where, Ducati are going to have to manage it really, really strictly, because otherwise you're going to have a situation where these two are going to be taking chunks out of each other and will be costing them championship positions. Bagnaia is going to go into next year, looks pretty much certain as world champion, but that doesn't give him any priority over the other guy in the red camp. So Bastianini, I think, is doing it all right. He's putting Bagnaia under pressure every possible time. I genuinely felt that he had the pace to make the pass on Bagnaia. Had it not been his prospective teammate for next year, had it not been the guy that's going for a world championship, and that's all. We talk about unwritten laws. There aren't any really unwritten laws anymore. I always like that little phrase that people use. An unwritten law that you don't interfere with a guy going for a world championship. Well, how many unwritten laws have we seen broken over the years where people, we can go back to Malaysia 2015 if you want to get to that one with Valentino and Marquez, of course. There was more unwritten laws broken during the course of their little shenanigans than just about any for previous years. Bastianini would have loved to have won that race. I think that he just had that very clever little bit of reticence in making the pass. I think anybody else, any other time, Bagnaia any other time, he'd have had a go at him on that last lap. I think he did the right thing and just rolled it enough to prove that he could be there if he wanted to be. Quite clever.
It's not often you see Gigi Dall'Igna get out from the pit garage and walk to the pit wall, is it? And that just showed, I think Ducati have done a good job of managing what is quite a difficult situation, isn't it? But it showed the tension, didn't it? It showed that they weren't comfortable with, in that middle of the race, Bastianini putting quite that much pressure and taking the lead. Now, I think Bastianini probably thought, because we know they're free to fight for the win, and obviously Jorge Martin proved that he was planning to disappear, wasn't he? He wasn't planning to sort of just ride up front and then wave Bagnaia by. So I think Bastianini thought he could take the lead and pull away. Now he wasn't able to do that, and then we saw Pecco came back past, but he stuck behind him, didn't he? And it was a bit like Misano again, wasn't it? But Ducati were obviously not quite comfortable with how close he was to Pecco. Now, as you say, I think after the race, careful was the words that Bastianini used, that he was being careful. And so, yes, he said he wanted to try and pass, but he was being careful. Now, it seems like after the race, there were some words exchanged between Ducati management and Bastianini's management about, quite how hard the racing was there. Bastianini's point of view, of course, he was still in mathematical title contention. He's now, 1 point off Aleix for third in the championship. And there's all the bonuses and everything that go with that. So that's sort of his point of view as to why he needs to keep pushing and everything else. And it all worked out okay in the end, didn't it? But certainly there were some tense moments there in Ducati pits.
Maybe they need the system that you have in Speedway. When you ride in a team in Speedway, you get a second place but a paid win because you backed your teammate up. So the pay scale is if you back your teammate up in a team sport, you get paid the same as he does for the win, which I think is a great system from a team point of view. And with 8 riders out of the grid in Ducati, maybe they need to adopt some system where bonus wise they kind of share it out a little bit if that's the case. I mean, it's having said that, it's not great for the fans. I mean, I think everybody, all of us, it's easy for us to sit on the sidelines and say, well, we want to see a battle. I mean, I'd have liked to have seen Bastianini take it to Bagnaia. You know, some of the best battles we've seen in recent years have been Dovi and Marquez on those last couple of corners where they've stuffed it under each other, got the cut back and all. Can you imagine a couple of these guys are well capable of doing that, and I was expecting that we might get some of that this weekend when Bastianini was honing into him on the last lap or two. But I think discretion at this time of the year is the right thing. I think Bastianini played the team thing. If he did, it might have been a Bagnaia won it out and out. I mean, I'm not saying for a second that Bastianini was a winner waiting to happen and he let Bagnaia win it. I'm not saying that, but certainly I think the discretionary route that he took was just to be careful, as Pete said, quoting him. I think that really, really proves that he's a team player when he really, really had to be. And a big sigh of relief for Ducati, I should think, because the last thing you need is them two hating each other going into 2023, because that is just going to be fireworks and it's usually counterproductive.
Well, while those two were fighting fairly fiercely on track, Fabio Quartararo was closing on them at times. It was a good ride from Fabio in the end, up from 12th. And considering Keith has got a broken middle finger on the left hand, he still managed to claim his first podium since Austria. But the gap now is 23 points going into Valencia. So he has to win no matter what to keep any chance alive.
Well, I think I've touched on this before. I mean, he will be doing his best at every single Grand Prix. I mean, I always smile when people say, well, the pressure's off now. He can ride how he wants to ride. You're always riding flat out. You don't give anything. You don't leave anything on the table when you're in Grand Prix, that's for sure. So he will be doing his best to win every race that he's in anyway. The only slight difference is, I suppose, is qualifying. You might throw caution to the wind if you completely muck it up, by overstepping the mark in qualifying. Then, but you need to be Valencia. You've got to be up the front end, and to win in Valencia against the kind of field that he's got. What an horrible task, I think Bagnaia has got a hand and a half on this trophy. He's the man in form. He's going to be more relaxed going into Valencia. I think, the reigning world champion is going to find it very, very difficult, in Valencia. What a horrible bloody place to end up with the final of the Grand Prix anyway.
No, not a fan?
No, never been a fan of Valencia. Wrong time of the year for the place. It's always freezing cold or chucking it down with rain. Next year it's going to be even later, which is ridiculous. I don't understand it. I understand the Valencia region. I mean, it's a lovely region. I mean, to be in Valencia is great, but not for a Grand Prix. The track they've made the most out of that racetrack that you could on the smallest piece of land you could put it on. You can see everything. It's like a concrete cauldron, if you like, but very difficult to pass. Not an easy racetrack. Some very, very difficult corners that, you ride on, you get to the first right-hander having done I don't know how many left-handers. And it's just one of those tracks that I wouldn't really choose to see the end of a Grand Prix season naturally. Give me a Mugello or a Phillip Island or something like that. Although I haven't said that, Phillip Island's well into the winter at that time, so you wouldn't be able to. But it's just a track that brings it's a bit of a downer for me at the end of a year. You've still got to go. Valencia's a great place, but not to end your season on. Why do they do that? I always remember British Championships. I won one of my British Championships at Carnaby, which was an industrial estate, a northern industrial estate, where they just put some bollards and some straw bales out for the final round of the British Championship. And you went from tarmac to concrete.
In a Tesco car park?
It was, but it wasn't even that. I think it was a bloody building site they hadn't built on yet. And it's just, you just think to yourself, who on earth thinks these places up for the final rounds? There you go.
Well, I look forward to next week's Valencia guide. That's going to be a fun one. But interesting, just coming back to Yamaha, Pete, and picking up actually on something Cal Crutchlow said afterwards, highlighting that something we all kind of knew, but the Yamaha machine can't really fight in group battles, or it's not the best for that. It's only really good at solo riding. And if you look at Fabio's wins this season, they've come when he's kind of gone away from everybody else on his own. I suppose he was a little bit on his own once he kind of recovered in Malaysia. But interesting to highlight there, and at tracks towards this end of the season that we know are not really Yamaha's strengths.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think both Bagnaia and Quartararo did the maximum they could on Sunday, didn't they? Both of them rode great races. Bagnaia with the pressure, of lead. We were talking, how would he cope with it? And, right from that fantastic start, I think that just took a lot of the pressure off him, being ahead of Quartararo. But really, they were evenly matched. A couple of seconds between them. If Quartararo had got ahead of Bagnaia at turn one, they were both starting a long way back. Like Aleix, they had that bad time in qualifying. But if he'd have got ahead of him, it might have been slightly different, but they were basically evenly matched. And for both of them, it was a fantastic ride. As you say, with the Yamaha, in the pack, it's difficult to overtake. Really, this 2023 engine that we keep hearing about, this more power, it's great, but it's coming a year too late, isn't it? He needed that bike for this season. That's the bottom line, unfortunately. He was talking late 2021. We were hearing all the time he wanted more engine power. We all thought it would come for this season. It didn't. No one really still knows why. It does seem to be coming for next season. It seems like they've made a lot of progress. He was speaking about Cal. He said they've been through 4 stages of engine development, and that's just the ones that he's tested. So they put a real big effort into their engine for next season. But unfortunately, as you say, he needed it for this season because overtaking is so difficult for them. And he got everything out of the bike. He was in clear air. It could have been a lot worse if he'd been buried in the pack, a bit like Phillip Island, and had lots of bikes around him. He was able to get a bit of a clear air, so he was able to do a good pace. But yeah, they want a bike that they can race with, not just do, let's say, time trialing with. They know it's fast on a single lap if you get everything right, but you've still got to do it in the race, and that's where they suffer if they're not in clean air.
We've been here before, haven't we? With Suzuki, with Aprilia, the upgrade that's coming for the following year is going to be this, that, and the other. We're expecting more horsepower and all the rest of it. And they and we have all been disappointed by the upgrade that perhaps has come at the end of the day. Engineering within the rules takes a lot of doing to try and come to that point. And Yamaha have been on the back foot with this for some time. The other problem is, of course, is that as soon as you up the ante when it comes to the motor, if that's out of sync with everything else that's going on, and it's a package at the end of the day from suspension, the electronics, and so on and so forth, if it's out of sync, you'll end up with you might have a faster motor, but you'll end up with a slower lap. It's a really, really tricky balance to do. I mean, Cal Crutchlow knows more about it than anybody. And talking about, Cal Crutchlow, he made that Yamaha working company, didn't he? He was fighting with all of them out there. So, I mean, 6 rides, 37 years old he'll be on Saturday, and he's still the man. I mean, I've got to say, I can't praise Cal enough for being able to get off the bench and do what he's doing at that level is just so impressive. You just wish that he'd been given the opportunities earlier in his life to be able to be where he is now a bit earlier. It would have been miles better for everybody. But that's the British way. We're all a bit late over here, I'm afraid, when it comes to ages. Can't you tell?
A bit late to the party, usually.
and fastest on Friday, of course, wasn't he, Cal? He again, just showing that awareness of not just being the rider on the bike, but realizing it's the home race for the team. The sponsors are all there. The track's drying. Let's put slicks on and put this at the top of the pile, which he did by 0.9 of a second, didn't he? It gives a great boost for the team after what's been a really hard season. So I think it was a clever move of him just to be even aware of that side of things. There would have been a lot of teams. There's With You is an Italian company, but the other sponsors on the bike, there's Malaysian companies there. Raslin is obviously Malaysian. Important event. And he goes and puts the bike on P1 in FP2. Fantastic.
Tell you what, the Brits are looking pretty good at the minute, aren't they? I bet Silverstone would wish this had all happened a bit before we got to the Grand Prix. 41,000 at Silverstone might have been increased by 20,000 if we'd had these the Brits doing what they've been doing this weekend, that's for sure.
Well, as usual, better late than never, but some Jake Dixon and John McPhee chat coming up shortly. While we're on Yamaha, though, I do want to bring up Franco Morbidelli in what was, I think it's fair to say, his best weekend of the season, not in terms of actual race result, but marred with penalties, of course. But top 5, he was saying, was possible without the penalties. Qualified season best 7th and was ahead of Fabio, actually, on track before he had to take those long laps. But then an incident with Aleix Espargaro right in the final lap. He had another penalty on top of that too. Is this the beginning of Morbidelli coming back?
Too late, if you ask me. I mean, it's
Yeah.
we go to Valencia and probably he's going to be in the same place that he's been for a while there. We'll wait and see. But he's had a disappointing year. He'll be pleased.
Would you have sacked him off by now?
No, I don't think you should do that. I think he's had his opportunity this year to put it right. If he can come back with a couple of rounds at the end of the year where it shows a bit of promise, then onwards and upwards in 2023. But they'll certainly be preparing for something like that. I would think they'll be looking at what's going on next year. It's always difficult. How long do you give a rider to come back to form? At this level, what is poor form? I mean, he might be half a second off of everybody else. It's minute the difference between the front runners and the 20th place guy. Less than a second quite often in MotoGP. It's not that he can't ride a motorbike, but for some reason or another, he's not performing to the level that we would all expect of him, and I'm sure the team expected of him as well. So a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, but what they say about one swallow don't make a summer? Something like that.
Do they?
By the way, that swallow is a bird.
Yeah. Yeah, we got that. We got that. Yeah.
The issue, of course, is that, as you say, you might just be getting the hang of this bike, but there's a new bike coming up in one race, after the next race. So, and then you start again. So Frankie will obviously hope that the 23 bike is a lot more to his liking. It seems like Frankie in general is much smoother on the bike. And, we saw he beat Fabio, didn't he, at the end of the season they were together in 2020, using this smoothness. But that was on the 2019 bike, which was kind of like a previous generation, if you like. There was a step in the development, which Keith has just said the dangers of doing that. Well, the bike changed. It suited Fabio. It hasn't suited Frankie. And he's been trying to make it work while keeping that smooth style. But he's, as Dovi also concluded, you've really got to do or try and do what Quartararo does with this bike. So he's gone to try and be a bit more aggressive. He's struggled in qualifying, like so many people on the grid this year. There's guys that would be much higher up in the standings if they could qualify better. He's another one of them. But it did seem like he made some sort of progress, didn't it, at Sepang? But as he says, it's one track. Of course, this was a track that they tested at the start of the year as well. So they had a bit more data and things like that than they normally have at these tracks. So certainly the flyaways, the other ones they hadn't been at since 2019. So yeah, we've got to wait and see, haven't we? And a disagreement with Aleix on the last lap there. I don't know how you call that. It's the last lap. Usually the stewards are a bit more lenient as far as contact. Aleix thought it was too much, that he could have gone down. It was at the penultimate corner, big wide corner. Morbidelli dived for the inside and there was contact. So yeah, Morbidelli felt that it wasn't a fair penalty. It just lost him that one position. It was a time penalty that basically just dropped him back behind Aleix. So he finished 11th officially, but he was 10th at the line. But he actually echoed the words of Paul Espargaro early in the weekend. He felt that the stewards, when the riders speak to them, they don't really sort of take into account too much of what they say. So, riders complaining about penalties, shock.
Can I pick up on that point you made, Pete, about the riding style thing where, obviously the bike's change doesn't really suit him? I think that is a very modern situation that we have in MotoGP, particularly at the moment, in that riding styles have to change. You have to adapt around the bike. It's always been that to a degree. You can change your standard riding style, if you like, to suit the bike up to a point. But I think we're in a period over the last 5, 6, well, Marc Marquez era, I suppose, really 10 years then, where style of riding a motorbike, you have to adapt. You have to work it out. I remember going to Sepang for a test back in the day when I think they went from Bridgestones to Michelins, and everybody crashed their brains out there for the first time, and they all had to adapt around the fact that Michelins didn't quite have that grip that Bridgestone had at the front, but had a load more grip at the back. The balance of the bike changed massively, so everybody had to change. And I remember seeing the silhouette of Valentino Rossi coming through them fast ones at the top, and the high part of the track at Sepang, and I remember thinking I couldn't quite work out the silhouette, who he was. Normally, as a commentator, you kind of get used to that. You don't see colours and numbers. Sometimes you just work it out from the way someone looks on a bike. And he was moving around on the bike, bearing in mind how old he was. He's an old boy by then even. And he was moving around on the bike, more Marc Marquez style. He was in a test working out what he had to do to get that bike to go. And I think some riders are better at adapting style to suit things than others are. Some have got that muscle memory. This is how I ride a bike, so I'm going to change the bike to suit my style. Whereas The really, really modern day guys, the really quick guys, are changing their style to match the bike as well as changing the bike to try and meet them halfway. And I think it's a real key to how you work with your team, who your crew chief is, who the guys are. Bearing in mind the limited amount of time you get on a motorbike nowadays, there's none of that testing. You used to be able to test your brains out going back in the day. You could go, if the factory wanted a test, we could test anywhere. But now you can't. So we've got limited testing as well, which is another reason why the engineering takes a long time to catch up as well, because you make a motorbike for 2023 and it don't work when you go testing at the beginning of 2023, you are done. Honda were there when the electronics all changed. Their bike was sharp. It was a bit like a stealth fighter, fly-by-wire, bloody, the computer flew the thing. Well, that was how the Hondas were. And then as soon as it went to Magneti Marelli, systems across the board, and the software was all similar, and so on and so forth, Honda were all at sea at that point. Suddenly it was Marc Marquez that was controlling the motorbike, not the electronics anymore. And he was the only one who could get on with it as it was at that time. So there are so many elements that alter the way you can ride a motorbike and the end product, how it ends up time-wise. Good to see Morbidelli back on it, but I think it comes under the heading and must try harder to adapt to what he's got. Dovi couldn't do it. Dovi's a bit old school. Again, it comes down a bit to old school. Modern day riders, you look at some of these guys now and they're all over them bloody motorbikes well, I mean, I don't know what, but it's outer worldly almost the way they're riding a bike. I mean, I couldn't even sit on one the way they do nowadays. It's just probably because my bones wouldn't let me, but it is completely different. It's a different way of racing bikes. I don't know whether there's anything in cars that is similar. I mean, obviously we've talked about it before, where you're strapped in the car area and pretty much you're in that platform. So all the alterations you make pretty much are to the car, and then it's down to the pilot to point in the right direction and brake in the right place. With a motorbike, you move an inch one way or the other, or get over the front or get over the back, in conjunction now with all this stuff you've got. I mean, you look at the reason I make the analogy between cars and bikes as well is you look to the handlebars now and it's almost like the steering wheel on a car, where you've got all this stuff you press. It's like a bloody computer game. Now, I couldn't remember to press all the right things in the right places. I have a job driving my car now. So red, green, blue buttons all on the side here, and dashboard that you've got to read what's coming across from pit lane when they're telling you who's about and what you're doing time-wise. There's a lot more going on riding a motorbike now than there used to be. Much more.
Well, when you do the comparison to cars, it's sort of the age-old question, is it? How much is it the car? How much is it the driver? How much is it the bike? How much is it the rider?
Well,
and you're saying there that it's mainly the rider.
Yes, I am. I think with the car, I mean, we had this with the Lewis Hamilton being subbed by George Russell that time when he jumped in the Mercedes and should have basically won his first ever Formula One Grand Prix, except the team and the tyres screwed him at the time. I remember it was outrageous. He should have won that. Was that at Portugal as well? I think it was, wasn't it, at Portimao?
No, I think it was. No, it was Bahrain.
Oh, was it Bahrain? Well, anyway, it's a situation where I think that I won't say that you can put any driver in the fastest car, because they've all got talent. I mean, Lewis Hamilton is particularly special, despite the fact he seems to have a whole group of people that don't like him for some reason. I can never work that out. But on a bike, yes, you can make the difference. The problem you have if you are on a slower motorcycle is that once somebody gets down there, and you've alluded to it, both of you already, the Yamaha is a bike that on its own, on an overall lap, can be very, very fast. But as soon as you've got a slightly faster Ducati, Suzuki, even Aprilia down the inside of you into a braking area, they've mired your fast line. So you can't carry that momentum, that roll speed through the center of the corner. You can't carry that through as you would do normally if you were on your own, which is why it's almost impossible. When you've got a fast bike and you've got a load of Ducatis all around you, they're going to beat you to turn one anyway if it's a long way up the road. The reaction time is negligible difference between any of the riders. The ride height adjustment you've got now, they launch. I can't believe how they launch. The system on a motorbike now is, again, I make the car analogy. When you stand at the end of the pit lane and they all do their first bite point test and they all blast off out in their four-wheelers, they hit the limiter, which isn't really the limiter. It's a start line limiter, whatever that is. I don't know how it works in a car because I've never driven one with it, but they just sort of hover at the optimum revs and dump the clutch, and it does it all itself. Well, that's pretty much how it works with a bike now. They hit the start line limiter, dump the clutch, and providing you've got it all set in the right place, they blast off. The reaction time is virtually the same for all these guys. They're all quick on the mark anyway. and down to turn one. And if you've just got a bike that's chucking out more horsepower, it's going to get there first. That's the way it is. If you've qualified it on the front row and you've got the 10 yards advantage over the second row, you're pretty much going to keep that down into turn one. Now, that didn't happen much at Sepang, I'm pleased to say. That's the other thing with motorbikes. You can ram them around the outside, ram it up the inside. And we got so much of that in those tricky little right-handed, left-handers. That I won't say Mickey Mouse because it's not. It's actually by design, and it works pretty well, I think, actually. The first right and left-handers, really, you can have an opportunity to get up the inside or get around the outside. And we saw that quite a lot this weekend. There was some great racing at the starts of races, but I've got to say, without Moto2 and Moto3, I think I'd have been a bit bored. MotoGP was not the most lively of races in the end.
No, you're right. And I think it was actually Fabio who's one of those guys late on the brakes into turn one once he saw Pecco was about to take the lead. Got himself up to fifth, I think it was. One man, though, now out of title contention officially is Aleix Espargaro. It's been a bit of a sad way to sort of end his championship, really, because the run of form he had up until the flyaways was sensational, but since then it's all kind of come a bit crumbling down for Aprilia. They're convinced, Aleix is convinced it's some sort of technical issue, and now only 1 point clear of Bastianini for third.
Well, it happens, doesn't it? In the development of a year, and Aprilia were having a fantastic time this year. It was all looking good. He looked like at any point he could be world champion, Aleix. It was a dream for both the manufacturer and for him as a rider. But when you get to this time of the year, the knives are quite sharp, and Aprilia dropped the ball a couple of times. Aleix has got himself mired in the odd argument here and there in his head. I always think sometimes Aleix, if he just could manage to keep that focus, that kind of, down to just the 10% all on what he's doing, rather than worrying about what other people are saying and what other people are doing, maybe that would help him a little bit as well. I mean, I'm sure he would argue that, but he's 33 years old. He's the second oldest man since Crutchlow came back. There's a lot going on in your head of that. He's a family man. He's got kids. Time's running out to win a world title. Perhaps he feels that this year was his only year that he's going to get an opportunity to win a world title. He will have been disappointed with Aprilia making a couple of mistakes that they made, which cost him. He's made a mistake or two that have cost him as well, which he'll be more than aware of and will beat himself up over. Your worst mistakes are the ones you make. The other ones you can blame somebody else for. That always feels better. Well, I always think so anyway. But it's been a great year for Aleix. I think he's proved he's better than a lot of people thought he was. And he's deserved to be where he is. Unfortunately, it's just tapered off a bit towards the end. But Aprilia are on the right ramp. Everything's going in the right direction with Aprilia. Rivoli will sort out that team and sort out any deficiency there is in there during the winter, and hopefully Aprilia will come back banging next year.
Big step, wasn't it, they made this year? I think historic season was what Aleix was saying after Sunday when he sort of dropped out. To say third in the World Championship now, he's going to have to fight to hold on to that. But still, it's one of the big turnarounds, really, of the MotoGP era, to go from where they were last year to even being in the fight going into the last round, if you like. Or being eliminated at the penultimate round. But yeah, it's strange where it slipped away, isn't it? I mean, it's these flyaways. We knew they were going to be a bit of an unpredictable sort of lottery, but they've really come out of this. Combined with Quartararo, they really suffered, didn't they, in the points? And Aleix, I think, is the best of ninth place in these races, and it's been frustrating for him. Sunday, he said, no top speed, no traction. I mean, certainly in the race, his average speed is like 13 Ks behind Bagnaia. Both of them were in the pack, so they both should have had slipstreams, and yet a really big difference. Things like that they can't really understand. So Aleix found himself kind of in the situation that Quartararo is normally in, of not being able to overtake because he hasn't got any speed on the straights. We also saw some frustration with the starting device, didn't we, during practice? He couldn't get it engaged again. All these little things that, as he says, probably playing on his mind a little bit. And it's just, from Japan, where that problem with the eco mode, wasn't it, on the grid, it's really, it's not. It's just been one thing after another, and it must be hard because the team must think, what's going to happen next. But a shame for them to drop out in this way. As Aleix said, the last 4 races have been a nightmare, really. But still, they can be proud of the season they've had. Aleix is, he's talking up their chances for next year, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, Ducati, they gave away a lot of points early on, didn't they, in this year, and that allowed other teams in. Will they make that mistake again? You've got to say it's fairly unlikely, really.
And I think Aleix would still be in the title hunt had he not crossed or thought he crossed the line a lap too early from the Catalan Grand Prix earlier in the year. I hate to bring that up for him, but it's not all team and technical error, is it? It's also it's also. But takes two to tango, doesn't it? But either way, I think it's fair to say a historic season for Aprilia, and one that they can be very proud of indeed, and hope for a strong end. And good to see Maverick Vinales, although poor weekend from out in Malaysia, has seemed to have made a step this year as well. So looks like the Maverick of old is starting to rear its head once again. We'll come on to more MotoGP a little later on. But first, a quick interruption to the show, because we are now delighted to be sponsored by the wonderful people at NordVPN. If you like us, and whenever you leave your country and get frustrated that you can't watch certain things because they're not shown wherever you are, NordVPN is what you need. It allows us to switch your virtual location to a country that is showing what you want to watch. And yes, that includes MotoGP, World Superbikes, BSB, and loads more. So now, wherever you are in the world, you'll never miss out on watching live motorbike action again, or just your favorite program. You can grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/crashmotogp to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus 4 months for free. It's completely risk-free with your personal information encrypted with the highest security protocols. And if you're not happy with anything, then Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee is there for you. So what are you waiting for? Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/crashmotogp to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus 4 months for free. And while you do that, I think it's about time we spoke about some of the more entertaining action that happened in Moto2 and Moto3. Keith, should we start with Moto2? And it was Toby Arbolino who came out on top. Long battle with Ayagura. But Ayagura, overambitious or the right call?
If you could have been Oyama, if you'd have been riding in the head of Hiro or Oyama, his team mentor, former superstar, you'd have thought, what was that? Just 20 points. I know you always want the 25, but it was almost like a rush of blood to the head from a little bit too far back on a track that wasn't giving you consistent grip in different places. I mentioned it right early on that it wasn't an easy racetrack this weekend with the way that it dried. There's high humidity, so the rain from the inevitable rain every single day was washing out the goodness of the track every single day. And he will live with that moment for a long, long time. I mean, I think of Jake Dixon all the time when he should have won at Le Mans. He has not yet won a Moto2 race. We know he's been on the podium now 7 times this year, I think it is, from memory. It's been a great year for Jake Dixon, but he still hasn't taken that win. In Oyama's case, he could have really put a massive dent going into Valencia in that championship lead that he had. And now he's 9.5 points behind going into Valencia. Well, in a Moto2 race, just about anything can happen. If you think you can make a mistake on a track like Malaysia, you can multiply that by 10 when you get to Valencia, because it's one of those racetracks where, crashing is us. It's like that time of the year, depending on the weather, it can be an awful racetrack to try and get a grip on. So Oyama, he may turn out to be an absolute hero, but now he's got the uphill struggle. He's now got the struggle going into Valencia. I mean, it's going to be difficult for him to live with. It's going to be interesting to see how this interferes with his head going into the final round. It should have all been so good, but in the end it wasn't. But Jake Dixon, another podium for him, another great ride from him. He's the, I've said it every time we've talked about Jake, he's the real deal now. It's funny enough, but I spent some time with his mother-in-law at the weekend at the race of the year at Mallory Park. We were up there supporting Gino Rea, of course, because Gino his rehabilitation is going to take some time after that massive crash he had in Japan for the Endurance World Championship race. And with me, Steve Parrish, Troy Corser, Gary Mason, we're all up there, doing something for on behalf of Gino, trying to make it good for him. And it's a situation where I wish I was able to go to the Grand Prix, but I'm more than happy to have been at the race of the year, I've got to say, at Mallory Park in these circumstances. I was going to go somewhere else then, but I had one of those moments where I forgot where I was going.
Shock. But Pete, I mean, let's save Keith here and go back to the Moto2 action because you bring up Dixon, another great ride from him, but a lot of people saying maybe was he a bit too aggressive in these final stages, perhaps interfering with the title fights going on where he's not so much in the battle.
It's one of those ones, isn't it, where people always look at it from one side or the other. They'll either say that you should race everyone normally, or that you should kind of, others will say, oh, you should sort of pull wide and wave people through. And it really, you've just got to treat people as normal, I think. And I think, Jake was racing hard, but I didn't see anything dirty. Obviously, Fernandez wasn't happy about it. You saw he was a bit reluctant to sort of shake hands on the slowdown lap, wasn't he? But yeah, I mean, it was hard, fair racing, which is what you get in Moto2. But obviously, if you're in that title battle, that's the last thing you want. You don't want hard racing, do you? You want your competitors to give you extra.
It's that unwritten rule again, isn't it?
Like
the unwritten rule that you don't interfere with someone in a championship. But when you're contracted to a team, to a sponsor, to a situation, you're paid to go out there and do the business. And Jake Dixon is paid to do what he did. He need to be on the podium. Who's going to pay his bonus if he's going to be a little bit earlier on the brakes just to make sure that the guy that's racing for the championship is okay? I think Jake Dixon did everything dead right. I mean, it's a situation. Do you cheat the fans? People at the side of the track, they've come here to see some good racing, and there's nothing like a bit of rubbing to give them a good event, to give them a good, get the spectators on their feet. And Jake and Fernandez were busy at it, which, and like Pete's already said, a couple of the moves were sketchy close, but they weren't over the top close. They were proper racing moves, and I think Jake's got nothing to worry about on that front. And in today's environment of penalties, you know damn well that somebody would have awarded him a penalty if they thought he was over the top, and they didn't.
That's it. I mean, what's the alternative? You only let the title contenders race, and everyone else doesn't even start the race. I mean, that's what you'd be effectively down to otherwise, wouldn't it? As long as people race as they would any other rider, I think I think there's nothing to complain about. But again, you can see it from the point of view of Fernandez and the IO team. Of course, they're racing for a championship. Of course, they're not going to like any close moves because they want their guy to do well. But let's face it, at the end of the day, they got that massive gift on the last lap anyway. So Fernandez, looking at, as Keith was saying, an 11-point disadvantage, now has that 9.5 points. That half point, quite crucial, isn't it? Because first to third is 9 points. So suddenly that half a point means that he can afford to finish, another place back. So yeah, it's going to be a tense finale. It's going to be, as we're saying, the MotoGP one, really, it's going to take a major upset for Bagnaia to obviously not score 2 points, but Quartararo to win that race is a massive task alone. But in Moto2, that's where all the eyes are, isn't it, in terms of a title showdown? Because, there's going to be a battle there. There's teammates involved as well. Let's say, Acosta's going to be up there. He's fast. Chantra, could they play a part in some way, perhaps slowing the pace? Who knows? That Moto2 finale is going to be one to watch.
Yeah, Chantra got properly squashed, didn't he? I was amazed to see him get back up after that. He had a rider and a motorcycle land on him. After he clipped the rear end of the bike in front and tipped himself over the front. Malaysia was a very interesting race meeting. I've got to say that it ain't over yet, but another reason why it's such a shame that we end up with going to Valencia, because these battles really would be great if we were going somewhere that was a bit more promotes, a bit more racing. We'll see. I might be completely wrong. I am often. Here's to Valencia.
Let's keep the optimism. Let's keep the optimism. And I think a word though, Pete, just on Aaron Cadet as well, who had a really good comeback to 8th in the end after being caught up in that first lap melee. He's 3rd in the championship, out. I'm pretty sure out of title contention now, 200 points back. He's got 200 points and Fernandez 251.5. So title out of reach, but a good comeback from him after looking down and out in the first lap.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And he was one of the guys, like Fernandez, started the weekend with an accident again, which is never a good way to, especially for Fernandez, obviously going from Phillip Island where he fell. He then fell in on Friday practice. Canet was another one who fell in Friday practice, tangled with other rider, but who was it? Zonta, I think Van der Gerburg perhaps, or his teammate. Anyway, got injured, unfortunately. Canet just lost the front. He left plenty of room, but lost the front, took out the other guy, and I think it's RW Racing. They've got 2 injured riders now, so really bad luck there. But yeah, Canet still chasing that win, though, isn't he? But if he could do it in Valencia, home race, I mean, a perfect end to the year, because this whole thing of, you talk about Jake Dixon missing that chance at Le Mans. I mean, Canet has missed numerous chances to take this first Moto2 win, and if he doesn't get it at Valencia, he's got to go all the winter thinking about it again. So, he goes Valencia, home race, home crowd. I think he could, it'd be a dream result if he could pull it off there.
Well, shall we talk about Moto3? Because that was probably the most entertaining race I've seen in a while. That last lap, okay, obviously spoiler if you haven't watched it by now, the John McPhee winning in Moto3, Sasaki second, Garcia third, Keith, but that order could have been anything on that final corner.
I'm only going to talk about John McPhee. John McPhee, 4 times now a Grand Prix winner. He didn't look like he was going to do anything this weekend. The bike was all over the place. They couldn't hit the sweet spot at all. He's qualified 22nd on the grid. 22nd, okay. Moto3, you can make up places. Sometimes you can come through. But he languished in 18th place on the first lap, came through to something like 12th place by about half distance, and was quite a way away from that front-running top 10 as it was. He'd got about a second gap. And in Moto3 terms, it's quite difficult to bridge a gap. But I did not see him place that motorbike a millimetre out of line anywhere. He rode the cleverest of races I think I've ever seen John ride. Yes, we know he can win Grand Prix. He's done it, and he's had to fight quite hard for it. But he was perfect in his strategy for making it to the front, and he placed himself in so many clever positions. I mean, maturity. He's out of a ride at the end of this year because he's too old to stay in Moto3 for next year. As soon as you get to 28 at the start of the year, you can't ride in Moto3. 50 for Moto2 and MotoGP, but in Moto3, it's 28 years old is a cutoff. Doesn't have a job for next year at the moment. Hasn't been on the podium this year. Had that injury earlier on the year that took him out of half a dozen rounds as well, which, he's come back from a massive injury that could have been career-ending. I mean, honestly, I just, your heart bursts for someone like McPhee when you know how much he's putting into it. You know how much it means to him, or if you don't, you should do. And to see him, he said in Parc Fermé he was proud of himself. That's not a boast. That was a ride to be proud of. Whoever you are, if you were Marc Marquez, you would have been proud of that ride because it was his placement. It was not, strategically, he didn't put himself in a bad position anywhere on that track, at any lap that I could see. And the way he placed himself as they got tripped up and fell over each other trying to scrap for the line, and he perfectly found the way through, read the eye of the needle. McPhee made it to the line. Honestly, I nearly screamed my throat out. I thought it was on the end of my tongue at that particular point. An incredible ride from McPhee, but I think the bit to be proud of was how clever it was. It was a career-defining kind of a race. If you've got one race in your career that you could stand back and say, that was me, that would be the one. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what class it was in. Great race. Really well done. Really well done.
And in typical Brit fashion, better late than never, Pete.
Yeah, I mean that move on the penultimate corner, was it 5th to 1st? That is just incredible, wasn't it? But then he also had to overtake his teammate into the last corner as well, and no hesitation, absolutely spot on. Difficult final corner, off camber and all that stuff. I mean, it sounds like it had been a total nightmare weekend up till race day, to the point where I think John was even considering, is there any point turning up? We've talked about, the mechanics that they've had to change in the team, the crew chief they've had to change, all of this kind of thing going on. He knows he's out of the class. He hasn't got anything in place for next year. And yet with all of that and starting 22nd on the grid, to put all of that behind you, fight your way forward and just exploit every sort of mistake by the people around you and be wheel perfect. Yeah, unbelievable ride. And I mean, to say you're proud of yourself, that's like the understatement of the year, isn't it, after that? But that's kind of John, isn't it? He is sort of understated, and he deserves all the accolades for that ride, because that was as good as anyone on that grid this year.
Sensational. that gets him into the top 10 just about of the rider standings. Of course, nothing really changing up front with Izan Guevara taking the title last time out, but a bit of a race to forget for the new champion. A little mistake at the start of the race, saw him drop sort of right to the outskirts of the top 10, I think it was, and then he ran to the back of Sasaki for good measure on his way back.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have Moto3 action like that.
Misclear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly, I don't know. Yeah, hitting the back of Sasaki, it seemed like I don't know. Sasaki, it wasn't the normal place where someone sort of runs into the back of someone. So I assume that's what that. But scary moment because it's a fast final. When they start accelerating, by that point, it's a tight corner. But by the time they get to where they were, they're shifting, and there's not a lot of runoff, and it's wet grass, wasn't it? Probably. So he did well to hang on. But there we are. Yeah, he's and his teammate is now taking over second, Garcia, isn't he? From I think from Foggia. So that's to be decided at the final round.
Yeah, the vice champion in PR speak. 2-4-1 for Garcia, 2-3-3 for Foggia, and then Sasaki 2-2-7. So he's not completely out of it either. So nice battle there for second in the Moto3 standings. But Moto3 was brilliant. Now, before we round things off, just a few more notes from MotoGP if we squirrel our way back. And Marc Marquez, I think it's worth having a little quick chat about him. A bit of a miracle, I suppose, qualifying lap from him to be on the front row of the race. Keith, a slightly different story. Dropped from 7th. He said he felt physically worse than the other races, really struggled. Honda, still the only manufacturer likely to be the only manufacturer without a win come the end of the year. And rumours swirling that next year's bike is already being delayed because not going to be at this Valencia postseason test. So, Marc Marquez is really, really stringing the beast that is this Honda bike at the moment.
That bike looked awful. Everywhere you looked at it, it didn't look anything. Marquez, to qualify it where it did, I thought that it was going to be a crash, almost for certain, in qualifying. I just couldn't see how he was hanging onto the thing. It just didn't look right. And if it looks so wrong when you're watching TV, can you imagine what it must feel like? It looked like an accident waiting to happen in so many different places. The position he ended up in the race, I suppose, was fair enough. But he rode the wheels off that thing in qualifying to get it where he did on the front row. Honda still haven't got over their problems. Honda have still got a lot of work to do to get that bike something like. Marquez is on quite good form. So really, I don't know which way this is going to go, for 2023. I really don't. Marc Marquez is still a very fast motorcycle racer. There's no doubt in that. Will he be able to pull something out of the bag when we get to Valencia? You can never doubt Marquez, can you? That's the problem. You can't rule him out of something spectacular. And if the bike is sort of close to being okay, we could have him winning at Valencia. He might just pull that Honda win out of the bag. You wouldn't perhaps put a lot of money on it, but you wouldn't then rule it out either.
Definitely not. No, left-hand circuit, isn't it? We know he goes well on those. Phillip Island was the most recent one of the left-handers, and we saw he nearly won that one. So, yeah, I think he certainly expects to go better at Valencia. As far as next year's bike, yeah, I mean, what normally happens is that the Misano test is when the factories get their first look at, or the factory teams get their first look at next year's bike. Now, we know Quartararo obviously tried the new engine from Yamaha, chassis parts, things like that. There wasn't the new Honda bike. They were still working through. They're still sort of working through options and trying to decide which direction they want to go in. And it seems like Marquez also isn't quite sure. Do they build a Marquez bike, the sort of the front end bike that he really likes, or do they, work on this rear grip thing? And Mark himself seems to be sort of open minded on maybe I need to change my style. Exactly what Keith was talking about earlier. As a rider, you need to adapt. And he's saying, look, maybe that's the way the bike needs to be in the modern MotoGP era. It needs to be, planted at the back, having rear grip. And I have to deal with that. I have to learn how to exploit the most from that. So, while at first glance, everyone says, oh, well, just give Mark what he wants, which is that front end, a nice solid front end, and he'll work the rest out. Even he's not sure, is that the fastest way around the track? Probably a compromise somewhere in the middle is what they're after. But yeah, he still doesn't know what he will have at this Valencia test. Only a one-day test this year. It's the only chance they're going to test something before Sepang next February. And as Mark said, really, what you get at Sepang is what you're racing. You can make a few small changes, but the start of the season is a month or so away. You can't redesign something after Sepang. So yeah, it's going to be a big test coming up at Valencia, and they got to hope for good weather as well. And I think, as he said, we're going to have one shot at this. So they're still gathering lots of information. We know that there's different things on Mark's bikes. Pole's bike doesn't seem to have changed at all throughout the season. I mean, they know he's off to KTM, so I mean, he's not getting anything new in that regard. Nor is Alex Marquez off to Ducati, obviously, with Gresini. He's not had anything new. But Taka and Mark seem to be having these different parts. Obviously, the Calyx swing arm was the most obvious, visible thing, wasn't it? But there's lots of other little tweaks, the aero on the back seat, everything else. They're trying to work out what they need for next year, but the clock is ticking.
I think MotoGP is still missing a trick. I really do believe that they're missing a trick regarding, a bit of a look back at concessions, and possibly if there's a situation where in the first 3 or 4 Grand Prix, you can add a few concessions to try and get some of those guys up on a fast track, performance wise. If there's a situation with Aprilia or whoever it might be, excuse me, or Ducati are going to run away with it. Maybe there's a situation, as I've said, I've been banging this drum for so long, I've almost worn my hands out when it comes to, let's not have the cutoff for technical innovation to be at Qatar or at the first round. Let's make that round 4. But also, maybe there's a situation where we need to manipulate the testing situation where you allow changes. If you've not scored so many points, maybe in the force. Okay, so we we keep the cutoff point for technical innovation at the first round, but then we have an enhanced concession situation where bikes that haven't performed particularly well in the first 4 rounds are still allowed to make some changes up until another. There needs to be, for me, something different there that needs to be worked out, because it's just not quite where it needs to be. The riders, the teams, the manufacturers do not have the time to put the innovations on their motorbikes before that cutoff comes.
And we should probably just say that, okay, Honda haven't won a race this year, all the others have, but they still will not have concessions next year because they've had a podium. You have to go a whole season without a podium. So there's no question of Honda somehow getting concessions, depending on what happened in Valencia. They've already, if you like, missed out on that because they have had the podiums 2 this year now, one with Pole at the very start and then Mark and Phillip Island.
Well, 1 more to go, and we will know who our MotoGP World Champion is. Our predictions aren't looking good for that. Pete and Keith locked in Fabio, and I locked in Aleix, so I'm already out of that one. And even in the race last time, Keith and myself picked up 2 points with our Pecco. I had Pecco and Enea, and who did you have, Keith? You had Fabio and Bagnaia, so we both got 2. Pete, I'm afraid, only the 1 point. So, in our own little championship battle, Pete just holds on to the lead with 19 points. Keith is in second with 18, and I am in third with 17. So it is all to play for in the final round in Valencia. We'll do the predictions as well as looking forward to Valencia, which I don't think is going to be a very enjoyable Keith's preview, but we'll see how he feels with that one next week. Let us know your Valencia thoughts in the build up to that, and we'll get them in. But that is it. We are done for this week's show. So make sure you're tuned in across Crash.net for all the very latest news and analysis across the week. And we'll be back with you next week. Pete, you're in Valencia, right?
Yes, yeah.
He is. Pete's going to be there. He's going to be there.
Race and test.
Race and test. So all the exclusive bits from Pete on Crash.net. Look out for that. Get your questions in. Leave them in the comments section or tweet, Instagram, Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. Please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And we shall see you right back here next week. Well, I will get the dress code and I'll come in navy blue as well. But from me, Pete and Keith, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.